I come from an academic background. I used to run a research in the University of Toronto, and for about 6 years, we were looking at development approvals and how permits get issued. We looked at international jurisdictions from Australia to Singapore, all the way to Europe, and looking at what are the best practices for getting building permits and development approval permits. And then we looked at digital solutions that other jurisdictions are using, looking at BIM GIS solutions, looking at e-permitting solutions internationally, and we started classifying them into different levels of the digitization and automation. One of the fundamental gaps that came up through that research was that there is a lot of data that's missing when it comes to developing a piece of land. So you might have 15 to 25 different agencies involved, and everybody holds their own data. Of course, there's open data policies out there, but tapping into those data policies has its own challenges. And so we started looking at how do we solve this problem? So we came out of UFT just as COVID hit, at the beginning of COVID, and started an organization called ACO Innovation Lab. And the idea with ACO Innovation Lab was to basically an earlier stage venture studio where we differentiate ourselves from an incubator. An incubator, you have startups that are already formed with founders and they kind of come to an incubator and the incubator helps them grow. With ACO, the idea was we create the startups. So we look at what are the needs of the industry, and then we validate that need, we get customers lined up, and then we go ahead and build a solution. So that's what we did. We spun up about 6 startups through the lab over the 5 years. And LandLogic was our latest child after that program. And the groups that kind of identified this as a gap were land developers and real estate developers. They were the first group that kind of came to us with this problem. Once we started developing it, then it kind of started to grow arms and legs, and we got to some other interesting places which we're going to talk to you today. But that's the mentality of not building a solution and then going to look for a problem to solve. We always solve the problem first. And in this case, the problem was how do we support digital twins, but from a data standpoint, right? And I know in the BIM community, when we talk about digital twin, it's usually the building, but our approach to digital twin actually starts with land. So our view is that everything starts with land. And when we look at a digital twin over time or a digital thread, that land information becomes very important. So that's why in our journey, we started looking at how do we compile all the land data together. So we built a GIS platform and we started compiling that data. And of course, naturally, we started looking at what happens when the BIM model comes in, right? What are the compliance checks that can be automated when you have a BIM model in the context of a GIS platform? And it's our view that with the grand vision of urban digital twins, and these are the foundational layers that need to be solved. So there's a lot of players in the BIM space, but we thought that starting with land could be a good differentiator. Now, in addition to the academic background and the venture studio, I also have a real estate background. I've been in real estate for about 20 years. And every time you look at a real estate transaction, you're always making decisions on partial data at best. In fact, we estimate around 12 million property decisions get made in North America every year, right? These property decisions could be a transaction, could be a financing, or could be a permit situation, right? So there's major decisions that are being made, and the total assets are about, I think, in the order of about $50 trillion. So even a 1% increase in efficiency could have a large impact in terms of efficiency in making decisions. Another thing that to look at is what is the role of AI in our industry, right? AI has been front and center in a lot of conversations, but of course AI is as good as the data that you feed into it, right? And one of the biggest challenges that we have is that we don't have AI-ready data in our industry. And I want to kind of talk about what that means and the inefficiencies that it actually creates. So when we say our industry doesn't have AI ready, that means all the natural language programs that are out there, all the models that are out there, When it comes to real estate, they start hallucinating a whole lot, right? And the reason for that is we can't feed that data into them. Couple of reasons for it. It's unstructured data. So we'll talk about what zoning as an example of what unstructured data means. We have incompatible data. We did a research project in the UFD, brought about 15 chief building officials together from across the province. And the idea was to standardize the permitting process in the province of Ontario. After 18 months, we shut it down because they couldn't agree on terminology. Right? We never got the process. Right? Is it a single family home or is it a single detached dwelling or what are we going to call it? And because they had legacy systems in the back end that nobody wanted to change, it was very difficult to actually get consensus. So when we looked at standardizing, we looked at other industries. In the healthcare industry, for example, they built a central data model and started mapping that to all the different parties. So that's what we ended up doing ourselves. So we built our own data model, started matching our data model with about 70 different municipalities right now in Ontario. So right now, through our data model, you can run queries across municipalities. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. When we look at zoning data, for example, and I think a lot of you are familiar with how zoning data is structured. For City of Toronto, for example, you have digital zoning maps, so you can get zoning designation of any parts of the plan. But if you go into details of the zoning bylaw, it's a couple hundred pages of the bylaw, and for every one query, there may be a number of equations that you have to calculate. So let's say you're looking at minimum lot area in a particular address, right? There's 3 equations, and I apologize for the small font, but there's 3 equations that you have to calculate, and you pick the smallest number, right? What we ended up doing is we digitized the entire bylaw of the municipalities, right? And when we say digitized, it means we actually computed all those formulas that are in the bylaw and then fused it at the parcel level. So now you can say, you pick an address and it tells you exactly what your minimum lot area is. And it tells you what your permitted use is, it gives you what your setback is. And now that you've done this, a number of things can happen. First, you can get a zoning report. So you pick parcel of land, and you get a zoning report that actually has numbers, not equations. Of course, it's mapped back to the bylaws. You can go back and check the map and whatnot, but you actually get numbers. But what's really interesting is that now it's digitized. You can run queries against that entire municipality, and through our data normalization effort across multiple municipalities. So you can go to the platform today and say, I'm looking for a parcel of land that has 2 acres. It's zoned for food manufacturing, and it has a frontage of X and a depth of Y, and it doesn't have any heritage or any floodplains or anything else associated with it. So you can run now queries against the land data, right? And it's this running the queries that's really unique, and it's a new opportunity now that opened up because of the digitization. Another thing that happens is that data can now be fed into any sort of AI model. Right? So if you're building your own AI model, whether it's for checking zoning, whether it's for site selection, whether it's for any sort of real estate assessment, you can now connect to a database and basically put that context out and build your AI on top of that context. So we built about 100 different context layers, if you will. One of them is zoning. We have official plan, secondary plan, environmental constraints. So depending on what kind of AI applications you want to build, we now have connections you can connect to and run that analysis on your side. So the idea is, by doing this foundational work, if you want to build an application for real estate or application for development, you don't have to go and digitize all that data by yourself, because it's usually not worth doing it for a single application. But once it exists, then you can build other applications on top of it. So going back to the whole data model, what we ended up creating was basically the fusion engine. And what we used as a fusion base was the land parcel. So we basically gathered all the different data sets. It's about 1,000 data sets across 100 different categories. And we fuse all that at the parcel level, so you can now run queries at the parcel. So you can say, for example, you pick any parcel of land, and under 2 minutes you can run an analysis of whether there is any environmental constraints, whether there's any, what are the different applications around it. We brought in building permit data, we bring in development application data. There's a lot of queries that it can now be enabled. But the question is, what do you use that for? And I think that's kind of why we're here today. talking about the fact that we're positioning this solution as an intelligence API, right? What that means is that the idea is we gather all the data that's associated with real estate and land, and we provide that as an intelligence layer into 4 different modes of delivery, right? So let's say you have your own technology platform and you're just looking for data to enhance your analysis. We created a data API, right? So you can just tap into that API and put whatever data you need to do. If you do have your own platform, but you don't want to pull raw data, we started creating reports, zoning reports, due diligence reports, real estate reports, and then we can provide that as an API. But then a lot of the industry players that we work with don't have any technology platforms. So we built this data studio that you can now interact with. So it's a subscription model. You're gonna go in there, but we've now built tools on that data studio. I'll show you a few of those examples. And the last but not least, which I think is maybe of most interest to this group, is that let's say you're building your own conversational AI, right? And we basically put MCP wrappers around our data tables, and we provide that as context to your AI, right? So if you're trying to build a conversational AI and you want to have accurate zoning or real estate or demographic or whatever kind of information, you can now tap into our context layer and kind of bring that in. The idea here was to going back to our roots of Eco Innovation Lab, was how do we enable innovation within the space, right? How do we enable players within this space to build application layers without having to deal with all the data layers at the same time? So the idea is this should really speed up the application layer build-up. And there's a lot of low-code, no-code platforms today that can build you the application layer that you want. And with data players like LandLogic and others that are in the market, I believe that in the near future, we're going to see a lot of new activity in the digitization space. Buying software, creating software is really being democratized these days, right? It's not going to be too long before you give a prompt and you get a software application. So this whole business line of selling software may become obsolete in not too distant future, right? But what's going to be, in our view at least, what's going to be key in differentiating that success from others is basically what data can you put into that model. And there are a lot of players that have their own data, right? So from an organization perspective, you may have your own proprietary data. You don't want to share your data with anybody else. And that's absolutely fine. The way we look at it is that if you have context data layers, like LandLogic, you can put your layers on top and run queries across your layers and the public layers together, right? So let's say we work with, for example, a fleet management company, right? So they have their own data sets that they want to bring in, but they also want to use the context layers that we have. So they can now run queries against your data in addition to the data sets that exist. Just give you a few examples of how that works. The data API is pretty straightforward. So you basically build a platform. We have endpoints on our API you can just pull from. But the reports API is interesting because we can basically, this is the difference between just selling data and selling intelligence, which I think is going to be a differentiator going forward, right? So in this case, for example, it's a preliminary site assessment report. Again, you pick a parcel of land, and then it runs the geospatial analysis on that land across the entire data sets that we have, right? And that's how you can pick different flags, right? You can customize those flags. So for example, we look for developers and we had railways. So if you're within 150 meters of a railway, you're flagged as needing a vibration study, for example, in some municipalities, right? So we had that as a red flag. We talked to Service Ontario, or Invest Ontario rather, and they're looking for properties that actually have rail access, right? So it's a question of, now that the data is digitized, you can run your own query based on your own criteria, right? Somebody might want rail access, somebody may not want to have rail access. So these reports can be customized and can be fit to purpose depending on whatever use case might exist. Another report is our zoning report. As a realtor, I worked as a realtor for about 20 years. If a client comes to you and says, I'm looking for a property that I can open a sausage factory in, that exercise includes 10,000 square feet for a sausage factory. You have to go find every 10,000 square feet property and then go check the zoning one by one to see if food manufacturing, for example, is a permitted use, right? But with digital data, you can now go and say, show me every parcel of land in City of Toronto that allows for food manufacturing, right? So it's these kind of possibilities that these digital tools and digitizing data can basically open up for us going forward. So that's our basically the zoning report. And then on the data studio, this is perhaps the most fun we've had with the platform. So we built a platform, we kind of bring all the layers on, you can turn layers off and on, and then we start looking at design partners. So the idea was, if you're a member of the AEC family or AECO family, whichever letter you're on, so architecture, engineering, construction, or owners, and you were thinking of a tool that you're gonna need, we kind of build this design partner program. You come to us and say, hey, I want to build this thing. I don't want to have my own technology firm or technology team. I also don't want to have to pay for development. It's a need that I have and it's a need that others have. So let's build that in. So one example was a developer came to us and said, we are focusing on 5 plexes and 6 plexes in City of Toronto, right? And every time I want to assess whether a piece of land is eligible for a 5-plex or 6-plex, we have to go to an architect, pay $1,500 or $2,500, and get a yes or no on whether that site is even eligible for a 5-plex or a 6-plex. So we looked at the reports and we saw that we have most of the data. We were missing a couple of data sets, so we got those in. And now, under a minute, we can now run a 5-plex or 6-plex assessment on any parcel of land. Another person came to us and said, now I focus on these 3 neighborhoods. I want you to run that report for every parcel and give me the list of addresses that fit this criteria the best, right? So these are the kind of opportunities that exist. And I think one thing I want to kind of leave you with today is, now in this day and age that we're in, with AI and with all the different technologies that are available, it's just down to your imagination, right? So what is it that you can imagine that you want? And there's probably someone who's willing to build that solution for you. So there's a lot of demos that I have in here, but I want to kind of, I know we don't have a lot of time. I want to kind of have a dialogue, but if there was no question at the end, we can come back and show you some of these demos and show you how they all work. But to me, one of the more interesting elements is, how do we get conversational AI and LLM models in our industry? Like, what are the use cases for some of those applications, right? So we started playing with this concept of Parcella, which is basically our conversational AI. Is just a pilot that we're playing with. So I'm gonna I'll show you in a quick minute what that functionality looks like, just to pique your interest and see if there is anything that might come to your mind.
I'm curious to know about the height limit for 2 Minto Street.
For 2 Minto Street, Toronto, the maximum building height is 10 meters. The zoning regulations include building height, max 10 meters, number of stories, max as per zoning regulations.
Oh, that is too low. I probably need to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment. Can you help me find nearby zoning bylaw amendments with higher height limits in this neighborhood?
In the neighborhood of 2 Minto Street, Toronto, there are several zoning bylaw amendment applications. 48 Lang Street, proposal for a 4-story townhouse block with 7 units. 80 Knox Ave, 12-story mixed-use building with 180 units.
Are these applications close to my address?
To help you understand how far the zoning bylaw amendment applications are from your parcel at 2 Minto Street, Toronto, I'll provide the approximate distances. 48 Lang Street, approximately 0.5 kilometers away. 80 Knox Ave, approximately 1.2.
Can you tell me the zoning regulations for 1427 Birch Avenue, Burlington?
For 1427 Birch Ave, Burlington, here are the zoning regulations for detached dwellings. Lot width, minimum 15 meters. Bylaw section, table 2.41. Lot area, minimum 425 square meters.
What's the flooding risk for 52 Burnbridge Road, Markham?
The flood risk for 52 Burnbridge Road, Markham is classified as high risk. Approximately 13.06% of the property intersects with a flooding area. This information should be valid.
Can I use this property as a childcare facility?
For 52 Burnbridge Road, Markham, the permitted uses include semi-detached dwelling, detached dwelling, shared housing small scale, home childcare, home occupation. You are allowed to use this property as a home childcare facility under the zoning regulations.
This was just something we were playing with. Obviously, it's a lot of work. But now with something like this, imagine you start adding real estate data into it, and start adding school data into it, and start adding all sort of other context to it. And it just becomes this powerful tool that can now replace a lot of manual time and effort that you would spend searching for things, right? And I think if you look at BIM, so this is all GIS based, but once the BIM information comes in, if the AI it's a database. At the end of the day, the BIM file is a database, right? If that database is structured, then AI can start answering questions from your model, and a lot of people have kind of played with that. So the technology, the rate at which technology is advancing is very, very quickly. And we need to understand, we need to come up with what are the use cases for our industry. And I think when it comes to digital twin, I think there's a lot of discussion about what is a digital twin. And to me, the definition of it doesn't matter. What is it that you're gonna use it for, right? Because it is whatever you want it to be, but what are the different applications for it, right? Some of the work that we did before, looking at construction management technology, we did some work at Waterloo, and we basically put some sensors on, RFID tags, ultra-wideband tags. We had 3D laser scanners on, we had drones going on a construction site to basically assess the progress of the site, right? The site super will tell us, Arash, this is all very cool. I can have someone just walk up and down this building, and they're gonna give me a lot more accurate information a lot faster. What's the point of all this technology? And that was a valid point, because that suite of technology just for progress tracking made no sense, right? But if that technology was in place with the RFID tags, if they in place from manufacturers, so you can actually track your supply chain. If the ultra-wideband tags were used to the inventory at the site level, if the digital capture was feeding into a digital twin that was going to be used for operations, then that technology stack would make sense, right? So I think my personal view is that one of the challenges that we have is too many point solutions, right? And when you have a point solution and you have to build a huge infrastructure of data and technology for it, that's where the adoption becomes very slow, right? But if you start taking a look at holistic view of we all work on the built environment, right? Whether you're an architect, engineer, builder, realtor, we're all talking about the same asset at the end of the day. We just interface with that asset at different times in its life cycle, right? So if we can agree on what are the different data sets that we all need to be able to make better decisions, then a lot of work can be done in a lot more efficiently, if you will. To me, the future is going to be data, right? I think the age of application layers is done. Application layers can be built very quickly these days. And the question is, what are the different data sets that we need to support those application layers? And more importantly, what are the use cases, right? What are the different things that you as a client or somebody is willing to pay for, right? And that was a big twist in our view, going from academia into a venture studio. And the idea was, if you come to a venture studio, ours or anybody else's, and say, I wish I had this solution, I think we're down to somebody else's. That is not mine.
I thought you were talking about both or with the design background.
Oh, this is all our video, but this is really cool. I forgot my train of thought. But bottom line is that if you can imagine it, it can be built, And I think if we start with a client's need to begin with, that's gonna be helping a lot of the startups as well. Instead of building random things that they can't sell to anybody, if the industry can step forward and say, this is what I need and this is what I'm willing to pay for, then we can start to almost navigate these silos of technology and innovation into what the industry needs. And I've worked with a lot of you in the room. I know that you do this already, some of you in your firms, but I think more leadership from the industry in telling the technology providers what it is that they need could make for a much smoother digital transformation across the sector. So with that, I'll pause here. I know we have about 10 minutes left, but I want to kind of, any questions, any comments, any challenges, any discussions that you want to start?
How do you guide the narrative with the clients? Because that's something as an architecture practice, the speed of automation, the speed to feasibility studies and viable outputs, on the fact that, well, can the client just do it themselves? So how do you guide the narrative that, no, we're still relevant, this is what we use?
It's a good question, and it's a big part of the problem. We went to the province of Ontario with a program called One Ontario. It was a program for a provincial permitting platform, because every other modern jurisdiction with world, that's what they've done, right? Nobody goes out and says, here's 440 municipalities, go buy the next tool, and that's what they've done. We've spent a lot of money with individual municipalities, each buying a different software solution. So as an applicant, I have to navigate 440 different applications. Not 440, but point being, there's very different applications. The idea was a provincial platform, right? So, of course, about 18 months or 2 years of back and forth with the province. It's just still under review. I think we've kind of gave up on it. But it's been about 4 years, 4.5 years, it's still sitting with the province of Ontario to kind of come up with a provincial permitting platform. But the Minister of Housing from BC reached out and said that, you know what, this is a really cool idea. Why do we keep hearing about One Ontario? I said, well, because 40 agencies approved it and backed it here, but the province isn't moving. And he said, you know what motivates politicians more than anything? Looking at somebody else to do it. So come do it in BC. Fantastic. So we spent about 4 months working with the BC government and kind of scoping it out. And they said, well, we're going to send it to an RFP or an RFI. So we responded to that. And then they went mute. And after 6 months, they came back and said, we decided to build our own platform. Mm-hmm. So the government of BC today is building an e-permitting platform. The problem with that model is that if you build a tool, and I think this, I'm getting to your question, how do you make this argument to a client? If you build your own solution and you're the only customers of it, there is really no ROI on improving that platform, right? But if there's a platform that you're using and 15 other companies are also using, right, then that becomes a separate entity that you're a user of. You could be an investor in, you could be a partner in, but that entity has a life of its own, can go and raise money from VCs, venture capitalists, and continue to evolve. And this is the big message, that if you build a solution in-house for a single client, it becomes an expense, it becomes a cost, and it's going to continue to become a cost. And another challenge is that with the rate that technology is changing, expecting clients, whether they're owners or whoever, to have the digital sophistication to maintain and update a digital platform is unreasonable, right? So my view, because I get that question a lot, is that construction tech as an industry has done better in many ways than construction industry itself. If you look at the ROIs, if you look at who's made money in construction tech, a lot more people made money in construction tech than they have in construction industry itself. But construction tech wouldn't exist without the construction industry, right? So part of our vision was that if we as an industry, if you have 15 companies in the room today, you all decide that we're gonna use this tool going forward, and we're all gonna say, it's a letter of intent, I'm gonna be a user of this platform. If 15 letters come on the table today, VCs are lined up, ready to give you money to build it, right? Because the challenge with a startup company is customers, right? If the customer base can coordinate around it, then VC money would love to come in, right? Especially if you have customer base that's across one country, right? So if you have companies that operate in the US, you get 10 or 15 companies together and just put a letter on the table, right? That this is what I wish to have, and if I had it, I'll pay this much a year to subscribe to, right? That is enough meat on the bones for a VC to come in and give you as much money as you need to build that solution, right? Now, you as a construction company or a design company, whatever the case might be, could be a founder, could be an advisor, or could be an investor in it, right? And I assure you, if you do this, the money that you put in that investment will do a lot better than the money you're actually putting on the construction project itself, just because of the scale, right? In consulting businesses, when you want to sell a consulting business, the multiple may be 2x or 3x, right? When you're selling a software business, it's 7x, it went up to 10x. If you're selling a data business, it's 15x or 20x revenue, right? So there's a much more interesting play on the tech side. And if there's one thing I want to leave you with is consider getting into that tech space, because what we have happening today is we are, as the industry, we are users of technology, and there are other people who are actually taking advantage financially of selling us the technology. And I think the shift that needs to happen is if our own industry becomes investors, becomes players in the tech space, A, we can build better tech because it's a lot more context aware. And two, is that by you being invested in it, then the adoption rate goes on, right? Then a lot of better things are gonna happen. So that's kind of my long answer to your short question, is that if you build for yourself, you may be able to meet your needs today, but there is no way you can continue to innovate and continue to build on top of that solution and still compete in the market space.
I had a couple comments and questions. One, just on the government thing. On top of that, for how quick tech moves, there's no quick decision how that happens in government. So my question is more though, have you talked to other provincial governments, particularly maybe some of the smaller ones that could pilot something to be a bit more nimble? Have you yet? And if not, I want to talk to you.
No, for sure. I mean, we're looking for innovative people and those who are willing to try. There's a number of different things at play, right? The procurement is designed so that innovation goes to depth, right? So government procurement is almost designed specifically to kill innovation. That's one part, right? The other part of it is that there are we gotta be honest, there are companies who benefit from selling the same solution 500 different times, right? So selling it once to the province is just not as attractive. So there's a lot of lobbies and there's a lot of different narratives out there, right? At the end of the day, when it comes to government, it has to be a top-down approach, right? If the federal government was going to do it, fantastic. Provincially, it has to be at the province. What the problem we ran into is we work with MMAH, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, in Ontario, right? The moment you say conservation authority, that's out of my jurisdiction, right? Whereas conservation authorities actually play a big role in deciding what you can develop, right? So then we looked at the red tape in this ministry and other ministries that kind of go across, right? And then you have ministers that change every 2 years, right? And they come from a completely different background, right? It takes them 2 years to kind of ramp up that portfolio, and then they're off to a different ministry, right? Yeah. So they usually don't put me on cover because I have the way I work from the side. I'm not very up to But point being that we really need to raise a flag that we are falling behind. And because a lot of money is coming down from the government, we actually need leadership in there that's willing to get things done as opposed to just not, right?
The other thing I was going to say, just because you were talking about the role of the industry in investing in software. So I mean, like Ellis Don has the innovation division, right? Hence the Pi, who's on our board at BT, who's with Hensel Phelps, he now runs Diverge and Learn. It's a VC kind of group. The other thing, Jeff Smith from Ellis Don a few years ago, he spoke here, talking about his fear of tech taking over construction. Now to call with a member of BT probably 3 months ago, And so they are a general contractor who's building a data center for Meta and buying the prefab components for Meta's factory in Texas that they opened. And they said it's just a matter of time before Meta doesn't need us anymore, right? And so I guess where do you sit? What's your opinion on like that divide that like you have Jeff saying, I don't know if Rory's in the room, but Jeff saying, you know, they're building stuff internally at Elliston and they want to create their own solutions, and then you have that like merger that needs to happen on the tech side. Like, what would you recommend, or where do you think it's going?
With Elliston, I'm somewhat familiar with the program. It's an interesting play. It's a bit of an incubator, right? That says if you have a startup, come to us, and then we'll be your design partner. We'll pilot this and we'll give you feedback. That's fantastic, right? And they can decide to invest in it as well. So that's also great. I'm suggesting another level, and that is forget about what exists in the market, right? Let's get together, 5-10 companies, right? Let's decide what is the solution that you're actually gonna adopt. Forget about what's available, right? Because building solutions has become a lot easier, right? So you just need to wish what is it that you need, right? And you can actually build that solution. So be at the table at the design stage, not necessarily at an incubation stage where somebody is gonna come and pitch you a solution, and then you gotta figure out, okay, how do I fit this in my portfolio of 100 different applications that I have, right? And I think one key point is gonna be integrations, right? So how do you, this tool that you're gonna imagine that you need, what are the APIs, what are you gonna connect it to, right? And how does it exist within your current infrastructure of technology, right? So to me, I'm suggesting one step before that, right? So instead of scanning the market and trying to assess the startups, forget about that. Let's blank piece of paper, what is it that you need, right? Because the chances are things that you need and things that he need and things that the other guys need, they're all the same, right? And they can't be that different. Right? There is proprietary information, forget about that. But when we used to work with builders, I used to work with Daniels and Tridel, and at some point they came back and said, Arash, we don't compete in construction, right? So if you want to service us, go work with Rescon, which is an association that services all of us, right? Because we don't compete, we want the same solution. If there's a better way for a site layout, then we all want that, right? And I think it's that mentality of what is it that we're trying to develop. Procore is a good example, right? Procore came in as a dashboarding solution, kind of evolved for a whole bunch of other things. But the money that Procore raised, I think the last raise, they announced at one of the, it was at the same time as one of these events many years ago. They raised $500 million, right? How do they raise that money? They're saying that their platform is being used by the construction industry. We are the construction industry. Right? So if you decide that you're gonna adopt the tool, there's a lot of money that can be attached to that from an investment perspective. That's kind of where my head is at in terms of industry at the table from day one, so that we can build solutions together, not just like stop being just the users of it, right? And actually start driving it. And I think in Ontario, if in this event, these companies come together, we can be an innovation hub that can build solutions that we can export outside. It's a really interesting twist. It's if you get the users, that's the chicken and egg problem, right? If you get the users lined up, everything else lines up behind it, right? And I think building transformation and entities like this, their strength is that all the users are at the table, right? So you just need to say what is it that you want, and what is it you're ready to pay for. Right? Because I've gone that rabbit hole before, right? When you start like talking about they want this and they want that, are you gonna pay for it? Well, no, I don't have a budget. Thank you very much, have a good day, right? So what is it that you're actually gonna pay for? Like what pain point are you gonna pay for? Is the industry willing to pay for to remove? And if we can do that, then I think we can, in Ontario or in Canada, we can become an exporter of technology as opposed to just keep buying other solutions. There's a lot of federal money and federal priorities around Canadian built solutions and private public partnerships. The environment for something like this is ready. We're out of time, but last one, yeah.
Yeah, you just asked what are you willing to pay for. So my company is the projects that pay for the technology. So
it's not really convincing me or asking me what I'm willing to pay for. It's having a solution that is very sellable to a client or to a project team, and what are they willing to pay. So how do you get around that sort of situation? If you just ask, like, we're all in the room, all these tech experts. Yeah, we know what we want, and like I said, but are you willing to pay for it? If you can sell it to my client, and you can sell it to my project team, then yeah, you'll get the money through me and through the company. So
The problem with that is that owners in general are not the most technologically sophisticated players, right? At the end of the day, it's our job, I think, to explain the ROI, right? So it's our job to explain, if you had this technology stack, at the end of the day, you get this digital twin, and this is what you're gonna do with that digital twin. So there's a bit of education involved, but I think there are owner partners that are willing to be at the table, right? And I think starting with them, and again, this is a role that in other jurisdictions government plays, right? So we have National Defense in this building right now in this session. They are the largest asset owner in Canada, right? Followed by PSPC, right? So if they come to the table, right, then you have a big portfolio, and they can set the standards that the rest of the industry can use, right? And I've had this conversation with D&D a lot, but the argument is that we are defense, we are not digital, right? Yes, we use digital, but our core focus is defense, right? It's a valid argument. But point being, I think you need to educate, we need to, as a whole, we need to educate the owners, right? And we need to also, it's a money game at the end of the day, right? If you can show the client that they're gonna save money in one shape or form at some point through the life cycle, we can sell them anything, right? So that's why we need to build tools that actually have financial ROI, as opposed to the next cool thing. What are the challenges that we have right now in architecture firms? Like, there's so many different tools, right? Like, there's so many tools, right? Do we need that many tools, right? And the reason there's so many is because there's a whole bunch of point solutions that a bunch of people thought of, and they're good solutions, but navigating your portfolio of technology, it's become a whole nightmare of its own. So I think maybe it's time to just put pause, try to go back and say, what is it that you need? Forget about what's on the market. What is it that you need? And let's see if we can just build you what you need. I'm getting also the flash. So thank you very much. I'll be around, and have a good answer.